one of the things I love about recovery is that acknowledgement that embodied and lived experience in and what we're trying to promote here is as valid, if not more valid, than academic knowledge. And so a lot of the work that I do tries to tear down the hierarchies and kind of promote different forms of knowledge.
Yo, I'm Bryce the Third.
And I'm Liz McKean.
And you are now tuned in to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. Here we dive into all the recovery stories from around the world.
And we talk about all pathways because there's no one right way to recover.
If you've been with us for a while, you know how powerful stories are. So get ready for your community to get just a little bigger today.
We are so glad that you're here. Let's get into the show.
What's up, everybody? We're here again for another episode of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. And I've got my co-host Liz here with me. Psych, no, I don't. She didn't show up today because she has more important things to do. No, we're playing. We love you, Liz. But today we're riding solo, and I'm riding solo with my new friend, Dr. David Patton. Dr. David Patton is an associate professor in criminology at the University of Derby's Social, Cultural, and Legal Research Center. His research centers on the lived experience of people recovering from addiction and rehabilitating from offending histories. And there is like 2 more paragraphs. I'm not going to get into the crazy paragraphs. What I'm going to do is, Dr. David Patton, how are you? How's your energy?
Hey, Bryce, great to be here with you today. Yeah, fantastic. And thanks so much for not reading out the other 2 paragraphs. It's so dull and boring. And it's always embarrassing to listen to them. So, yeah, really great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
I appreciate you being here. And the thing with me is there's a lot of things that on paper look boring, especially when you get to using words that I don't necessarily have the context for. But when you dig into it and you dig into the work and you meet the people behind the work and you hear the stories behind what motivates the people in the work, then it gets really exciting. And so I'm excited to hear from the person who's actually immersed in this work, what this work means and what it's like to dig into it. But first and foremost, how are you? Where are you? And how's your day going?
Yeah, so I'm based in Sheffield in England, and it's half term kind of school holidays here. So I've got 3 children, 8, 11, and 14.
Okay.
So life is always fun and full on at the same time. So I've been working away in the background. So my wife's been kind of off doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things with the kids. But yeah, the day's been good. It's been very productive, and it's ending on this note. So it's like end of the workday here in England. So what a way to end the day.
Nice. You said 8, 11, and 13.
Yes.
That is a range. You are living a real life adventure.
So if ever you're free, Bryce, pop on over. You're very welcome.
I'm done babysitting in my life. I'm not doing that no more.
No, your uncle. You're not a babysitter. Your uncle. So.
Uncle Bryce. I like that. Uncle Bryce.
Yeah.
So how do we get connected? What is your connection to the recovery space? You mentioned a mutual friend of ours in the beginning offline. I'm curious to give an on-ramp to our listeners as to how we were tied in.
Yeah. So Beth Collinson was a PhD student of David Best, Professor David Best. And so I was invited onto the supervisory team, I think in the last year of her PhD, and she was exploring recovery and asset-based kind of community development. And so Beth and I have known each other since then, and we've kind of followed each other's journeys, and we kind of really had a mutual passion for how recovery kind of tips over to those beyond the recovery community. And so Beth's recently invited me to become one of the research partners at the Phoenix to work on a particular project. So that was how the connection first formed many years ago during her PhD studies.
We love you, Beth. Yeah, Beth is an amazing human being, and she has a knack for making research interesting, making it exciting. And I'm curious, were you always interested in research? And for those listening who are like, okay, research, what does that even mean? What do you consider research to be?
Yeah, it's funny, I'm kind of if you go back down my timeline, I was a kid kind of from the equivalent of project. So come from, in England's terms, like a council estate. So education really didn't kind of have much of a high value for a long time in my household, just because of, high unemployment rates, high crime rates, all of that comes from living in that kind of geographical space. So if you'd have asked my younger self, what's research and are you interested in, being like, hell no. Um, and similarly, like reading the stuff, the research textbooks, and I remember kind of it was almost like they were written in a different language. It was like
Mm,
reading Russian, and that is a real barrier of entry because actually knowledge is for everybody.
mm,
And I think that what's happened in our society is that knowledge is presented in a very academic way. And I think one of the things I love about recovery is that acknowledgement that embodied and lived experience in, and what we're trying to promote here is as valid, if not more valid, than academic knowledge. And so a lot of the work that I do tries to tear down the hierarchies and kind of promote different forms of knowledge. So, yeah.
mm. So I'm curious as to how you went from, being in the PJs and not having access to education and those resources to uh, becoming interested in the study of understanding how things work and why things work,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then specifically tipping into the realm of substance use disorder or recovery. Like, what led you there?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I I think you have to go back some almost 50. So we've got to go way back to kind of when I was 13. And, growing up at that point, kind of living in the social housing, both parents kind of weren't working. So we're on benefits or welfare, as you would call it. And I was bored stupid. It was the 6 week summer holidays from school. And parents didn't have money to kind of take me on holiday and do those things that, lots of kids enjoy. And so I was really bored in my bedroom, staring out the window on a hot summer's day. And, you know, the daydreams were on various kind of themes. And then all of a sudden, just this daydream came out of nowhere. And it was like one day that I would write these books,
Mm,
and the topic of these books would help people. Which was crazy, Bryce, because at this point, I'm in the bottom set, the bottom, for all of my subjects in school. And I'm getting like 3 out of 50 for my tests. And, so it wasn't like I was some bright kid or, was doing really well academically. So this was my destiny that one day, I'd become a professor and all of this stuff and do publications and research. That wasn't on the cards. A lot of my
mm,
friends at that time were using drugs or, have since gone to prison. Some of them are now dead. Um, and so it was this daydream at age 13 that then meant that, hang on a minute, what track am I on? How do I see myself? And where do I want to be in life? And I knew that actually, if I kept doing what I was doing, that wasn't going to help me live out this dream, if you like. So I remember going back to school kind of after the 6 weeks holidays and started putting my hand up in the class and asking, "Excuse me, miss, what does that mean?" It
mm.
wasn't very popular when you're in the bottom set, but actually, it paid off. And so I went from a kid who believed that I was thick and stupid and couldn't do it to a kid who could do okay, and so I left school with kind of average qualifications in terms of grades, not the best. I wasn't a grade A student by any means, but I got enough to get through to that next level. And so then went to college and, I was told as I applied to college that I wasn't intelligent enough to do 3 A levels, as they're called in the English system. I could only do two because
Mm,
based upon my grades, that was all I could cope with. And again, I did okay. I didn't do great. But for me, it was once I got to university and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I used to watch a lot of American uh, LA Law kind of
You just
solicitor
watch some
type
Law and
programs.
Order, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You look dressed nice, you go out to lots of lunches, don't do a lot of work. I thought I'd like a job like that. Um, and so anyway, kind of the study of law I found quite dull. No offense to any lawyers who are listening, but it was just very much like, this is what the law says, memorize it, and this is what the judge says, and memorize that, and just repeat it. And I thought, I don't want to be a photocopier.
Mm,
And so I changed my degree in my first year to criminology. And through a mutual friend, she was like, David, you're always debating and asking the why question. And it was that match of kind of interest and passion and
mm,
skill. And so I started studying criminology, and I just got straight A's from day one.
mm,
It was just like something, when you connect with what it is you're meant to do, just the amazing things happen. And it was damn hard work as well. It required lots of effort. It didn't come easy. But actually growing up in the projects, um, that really gave me a different knowledge base from which to understand the theories and a different vantage point. And I guess linking to recovery, what you see is that people occupy lots of different identities. And I've shed lots of different skins during my journey. I had to let go of that boy who was 13, who I thought was stupid and wasn't very academic and very bright, to accepting, hey, hang on a minute, I've got a first class honors degree,
mm,
and then that set the dream for the next phase. Oh, wow. I love learning. And then maybe I'm quite good at it. And, so then the pursuit of doing a PhD and becoming Dr. David Patton, and then on, from becoming a doctor to now associate professor, and hopefully one day a full professor. So it's been a journey, Bryce. It's been a journey. And so you asked how the drugs kind of fitted into that interest in drug and drug recovery.
mhm,
Yeah, I had some family members and kind of friends who got involved in not just using drugs, but also in terms of addictive kind of pathways, if you like. Some of whom not here, today. And I was always fascinated. I've never used drugs personally in terms of illegal ones, not been addicted to drugs. So I was always fascinated by, for me, it's the identity culture and the drug itself. So that intersection between the three, kind of how that impacted my friends' life choices, their identities, their career or other pathways, with the relationships that they then formed and avenues that they didn't pursue as a result. That fascinated me from early on. So during my undergraduate, kind of looked at kind of popular culture, music, the dance scene,
mm.
and how there was a link between those two and what young people, the pathways they then take. So it's evolved since there. Kind of, yeah. I could talk for another 20 minutes on that question, but I'll pause there.
No, I mean, I feel like I could relate as a person in recovery myself. the- I, when you talk about the shedding of the old identity and the evolving into the new identity and being someone that people looked at, oh, you from there, and so
Hmm.
there's no way. And a big thing that I learned about the process of transformation is community plays such a huge role in it, because I had to borrow what I felt that other people seen in me when they believed in me, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't have that inherently, because I come from where I come from, and where I come from there's a ton of people looking at me like, you gonna be here and stay here.
Yes.
So when I went into these rooms and people believed in me and poured into me, I had to borrow how they seen me to
Hmm.
evolve into what it was that I was becoming.
Yes.
And that shedding of that identity is a process that once embraced and embarked upon, then it becomes like, oh, like, I really like this. Like, how deeper can I get into this? And I
Uh-huh.
found out that, oh, I'm really interested in this, and I can see myself in a different way than I've been before. And so now it's like, to be honest with you, I feel like I've lived like 15 different lives. I've been
Yes.
15 different
Yeah.
versions of myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. But don't you think it's so sad that so if you think about the dominant stories that are told about people with certain characteristics or coming from certain zip codes, postcodes in England, having certain life experiences or certain characteristics that then shapes your identity in
Mm,
positive or negative ways, and that we internalize that,
hmm.
and it's taken me a lifetime of undoing, and
Yeah.
that's nonsense still shows up today.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting for me, and still I don't think I've never really like talked about this on a platform, but over here, I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And over here, especially like within my culture, there's the question of like where you from. Like even with
Mm,
the music I listen to, when somebody tells me about like a new artist, specifically within the genre of hip hop, I'm like, okay, where are you from? Because that kind of gives me an idea as to like what his perspective on life is. Because if you're from the West Coast, it's going to be different than if you're from the East Coast or if you're from the
uh-huh.
Midwest. But that's something that I've always, mm, I wouldn't say struggle with, but like my vessel never agreed with the answer to that question, because no matter where I said I was from, I never felt I belonged there.
Yeah.
You know, and
Mhm.
and it. How have you seen that that question has impacted people, the where they're from, or how they see themselves? Like, have you seen that be a thing that contributes to people's identity?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So where I'm from is from the northeast of England in a small town called Middlesbrough, and it always, annually kind of tops the charts. Unfortunately, for the worst place to live in England,
Mm,
because of the crime rates and the mortality rates and the health outcomes and all of that stuff, low educational attainment, you name it, it's got the worst metrics. And so people who live there generally, typically, got to generalize, but as a whole, if you were to observe, there's a lack of hope, there's a lack of aspiration.
mm,
Um, so there's that kind of sense of being downtrodden because you were born in this geographic location. Whereas if you were born further south, if you were born in London, that's not necessarily part of your narrative about yourself and where you live. And that hugely shapes then your aspirations, your pursuits, the the efforts that you make towards certain activities or not. And that's something that we really need to kind of address, this kind of attachment to different localities or characteristics determining a sense of aspiration or otherwise.
mm,
Yeah, it's huge. I call
mm,
it the hegemonic narrative. It's deliberate. So in England, there's a definite north and south divide
mm,
with all of the investment and affluence and prosperity
mm,
typically concentrated in the south. And the further north you go, the more of a desert it becomes. So social policies and lack of investment really have obliterated entire generations
mm.
of people, really lovely people. But the
Yeah.
stories that are told about people from these locations are typically negative or of a certain ilk, and then that plays out. And yeah, we've got to bust it.
Mm. And I think that kind of leads me to, well, what does it look like to bust it? What does it look like to use the work that you've become so involved in to generate a solution, or at least contribute to the conversation of how do we improve?
Yeah. So I think, you've got to recognize that it's a story, and it's a fictional story. And so coming back to one of your original questions around like, what is knowledge, what's research, and linking it to recovery. One of the things I've done is set up a publishing kind of house called New Central Media. And it stemmed from a Toni Morrison quote that I really love. And she said, I stood at the border and I stood at the edge. And I stood at the edge and I claimed it as central.
Mm,
And I claimed it as central and allowed the rest of the world to move over to where I was. And so challenging the typical stories around what it means to be in addiction, or as the worldly kind of terms of addict and junkie and all of those negative kind of labels that stigmatize further and determine choices and identities. Actually, what we're doing is we're allowing people in recovery to become the authors of the books that we're going to create. So they're the authors and knowledge producers, not myself as an academic, and they get paid for their contribution.
Mm,
And what's blown my mind, Bryce, is that kind of I'm reading these incredible moving stories of people who, tremendous levels of adversity, lots of limiting beliefs and identities occurring in the early stages, especially during addiction and getting into addiction, overcoming those barriers and challenges and emerging as this new transformed self with improved well-being, kind of quality of life, flourishing, positive relationships, all of that. Um, and that knowledge it needs to be recognized as knowledge. And so new central media is trying to challenge this notion of what is knowledge and who are the knowledge producers in an attempt to, going back to your original question, how do we break it? We
mm,
break it by stopping this nonsense that it's only academics and professionals in certain institutions, such as universities or otherwise, policymakers that can write the story. No, they can't. We all are knowledge producers and we can all write the story. So we've got to create that new center. And that's how we can break. That's one of the ways I think in which we can break it.
mm. That is an interesting notion to like meditate upon. There's there's this there's this experience that I've had where I I, I got sober through a specific program, a specific 12-step program,
Yeah.
and there are processes like that container where here's a program. If you do this as it's laid out, the chances of your recovery are as high as the millions of other people that have walked through this program and have continued to maintain sobriety and entered into recovery. And then there's an element to the experience where it's a bit individualized because of all the different variables of all the different people who come from all the different places. So even though there are programs where it's like this is the the program that you can use, you could use this in this way in this order, and it'll work for you like it worked for them. There's an element of like, yeah, but I'm black, or I come from, the east side of Detroit, or I'm,
Mhm.
a woman, or I'm transgender, or I'm young, or I'm older, or I'm like those unique experiences where it's not necessarily a process of putting lightning in a bottle and giving the same bottle to everybody. What have you learned from these stories that you've collected? Is there a commonality between the different stories of different people from different places, or are we still in a place where we're learning a lot and understanding how to show up for everybody?
Yeah. Well, I think what's clear is that there's no one size fits all. And actually, where, you know, a lot of drug treatment, especially through the medical model type approach, kind of typically uses it creates these programs and interventions and ways through which people have to kind of fit and work through in order to gain um, detoxification, abstinence, and then recovery. And that can work for some, but actually it can create more trauma and more harms um, than were there in the first place. Because if you're talking about, for example, different cultural and culturally sensitive approaches, the whole gender, race, as you go through recovery, of course it needs to be different. But actually, they're designed by white males, typically a white male European centric approach. And therefore, in the UK context, the number of Black and Asians that enter treatment and recovery is the proportion's really low. And
Mhm,
we know that, and they get labeled as a hard to reach population. It's like, hang on a minute, not hard to reach population. It's that the system that what we've created through coloniality is not appropriate for
mm,
different sectors of the population. But of course, it can't recognize that. I can't recognize that it's failed. or that it needs to improve. So it has to recreate this narrative that the problem is out there with those types of people, that they're hard to engage, hard to reach out, and have these barriers. They have these issues with authority, a lack of trust. It's responsibilizing the people over there as having the issue rather than going, oh, hang on a minute, maybe we've created this cookie cutter system that if you fit this shape, it works, but if you don't, we'll just try and shoehorn you through it,
Mm.
causing more damage. So yeah, the stories reveal that we do need a more diverse range of approaches. So at the moment, we've got kind of 4 different books on the go, and interestingly, one is a women's recovery pathways book, one is a Black and Asian recovery pathways book. So the authors of those books are exclusively women or Black and Asian, with the second book.
Mhm.
So it's not those. What often happens with researchers is it's typically a white male, not always, but typically. And I might do surveys or interviews with people in recovery. But then when I'm analyzing the data, all of that knowledge gets translated through me, through my words, through my paradigm, through my perspective. Now, as wonderful and as liberated as I think I am, it's still coming through me
Mm.
and it's expressed in my words. So the beauty of these books is that actually it's in people's own words from their own vantage points, unadulterated, raw, and and then that's why I think it's going to be so powerful to finally one acknowledge that these people as the experts that they are the authors of this and producers of this knowledge, but also we get to read in its raw form the knowledge, unadulterated and untranslated. Does that make sense? And I think
Yeah.
therefore other people who are in those situations, A, going to likely more connect with what they're reading, but also for me, individual stories, the thing that really gets me, if I'm being honest, Bryce, is that you see all the time in recovery that people are wheeled out to tell their story. And even that phrase, story, hang on a minute, my life isn't a story,
Mm.
is it? It's not a story. So that phrasing, I think, needs to change. But also what it does is that, if you get Billy or Bryce or whoever, Sally, to come out and tell their story, then we see it as those individual people's kind of life history. And I think that what's unfolding through the work that I'm doing is that each individual story is telling a bigger story. Okay. And the
Mhm.
bigger story is that in the, especially in the Western kind of world, that through coloniality, the way in which we live, through capitalism, patriarchy, all of that stuff, consumerism, those structures, those ways of seeing the world, those ways of relating. So a few quick examples, because of capitalism, when we're at work, we've always got to be like this puppet performing, you know, but actually I can't be at 100% every single day of my life.
Mm.
As wonderful as I am, I just can't do that. And when I'm leading projects, you know, I've got to have this mask on and pretend, yeah, everything's going great. Everything's good on my project. Bryce, how's your team going? You know, we're set to be ahead of target. We're going to deliver on time. No, there's no interpersonal issues in my team. We're like a big family. We all get on. And then, everyone else is going, okay, well, maybe it's just my project, but you took my team. And so then we're all thinking, oh, it's me. There's something wrong with what I'm doing. But then we put on this facade and we dig deeper to try and working harder to try and keep the plates all spinning. So it puts lots of pressure upon us. And this fake self that we create in the workplace, this is just one example, the home and other environments, there can be lots of other examples. So capitalism manifests in the way in which we show up at work, the way in which we continually feel that we've got to perform and be a fake self. Or, I was kind of thinking about even on my street with neighbors, like the way in which we relate to one another. You ask anybody how they're doing, what's going on, it's like everyone's fine all of the time.
Mm.
How many people come back when you ask them that question and say, something different to, yeah, all good, thanks. How are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? You know, and I've lived on my street for about coming up 13 years.
Mm.
And the extent of my conversation with some of my neighbors is, hey, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. How are you? How are your kids? Yeah, they're all great. Yeah, they've just always just passed some exam, just got some really great job with really great opportunities. You know, no one's talking about the fact that their kids that might be using drugs or with the wrong partner, or they're really concerned about the choices they're making. Those conversations are not occurring,
Mm.
you know? And again, kind of as a result of kind of capitalism, we've always got to be okay. We've got to be self-sufficient. We've got to provide for ourselves and make sure that we've got the material resources to be okay. So everyone on the street, you know, we all own our own individual lawnmowers. So in the summer, we're all walking backwards and forwards in our gardens, cutting our own grass. There's like 20 lawnmowers on the street. Why the hell do we need 20 lawnmowers? You know, it's like, can't we just share? You know, but we've all got to have our own stuff.
uh,
Yeah. 50
yeah.
vacuum cleaners or what, you know, I'm kind of egging it up a little bit. But it's this notion of, you know, being an independent unit, and we can't be vulnerable, and we can't ask for help, and we can't say that I need something from you, and it's not helpful. Whereas, and this is kind of linking to some of the project that we're working on with Beth and the Phoenix, when you enter recovery, and more specifically, as I've mapped out kind of a culture of recovery, and of course that there will be diverse, but if you look at some of the common elements of recovery, actually, what you see is that people bring their whole self into those spaces, into those rooms.
Mm.
And so if you ask someone how they're doing, yeah, they'll tell you the good stuff and the things that's going well and fine, but they'll also tell you the stuff that's a bit wobbly and
Yeah.
where things aren't going so well, you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, um I consider myself to be a pretty transparent person, but there's also a level of psychological safety, uh, cultural safety that I'll feel before, like, if I'm walking down the street and somebody asks me, "Hey, how's the day going?" I'm like shit. I don't, like, I don't know this person. We probably not gonna talk again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there are more than a handful of people in my life, my co-host Liz included, where if I'm asked how's my energy or how's it going, then I feel like it's less than stellar, or maybe there's something specific contextually that I could use the space for. Like, I take the space, but the, there is. I do see what you're saying. There is a culture of, like, hey, I'm fine, everything's fine here, like, and if I show any semblance of vulnerability or emotion, that could be translated as weakness. And I think I might be biased because I've been immersed in the recovery community and adjacent communities for the past 11 years.
Mhm.
But I find that within the community, vulnerability is required, but once you approach a relationship with vulnerability, it is usually reciprocated as people are able to hold that space. And,
Yes.
but it takes for me to raise my hand and say, like, look, I'm not well today. I'm not
Mhm.
doing that great. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is there something you could point me to or help me with?
Mhm. Yeah. And so working in an organization or in adjacent communities, as you expressed it, it is a different landscape. It is a different container. If you were to take yourself out of that scenario, either into your neighborhood, the street, or into a commercial kind of place of employment, and you show up, you would probably sense that this isn't psychologically safe, so you would give a different response. Or two, if you were to give the honest response to your colleagues that you're working with, their response to you would be very different to the ones that you receive at the moment. And
Yeah.
so what I'm arguing is that really that this culture of recovery We need to stop focusing on individuals so much and actually recognize that when people in recovery come together, there's this acknowledgement, not necessarily explicit, not necessarily conscious, but what's being created is an alternative way of living, of being and sensing and relating to other people. So, I call it, you can call it an enclave or a heterotopia, whatever you want to call it, but it's an alternative space. So, yeah, we're still living in the reality of capitalism, coloniality, and patriarchy, all that stuff. But when you come into a recovery space, you're coming into an alternative space. When you're in that space, you can experience healing, transformation, restoration, redemption, whatever, and so on and so forth. Because what is occurring there, the way in which people are relating and supporting each other, the fact that people are sharing their whole self, the fact that people are known, so people would see to actually, Bryce seems a little bit off today. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of get alongside him, just check in quietly and see how he's doing. Or he just seems a little bit kind of down today. I know his favorite drink is this. I'm going to pop out and get him his favorite drink just to put a smile on his face. You don't even have to ask or say, hey, I'm not feeling myself today. People in your team and in your community pick that up and do that for you. Whereas people in the, just as a contrast, in the corporate world where it's not the same community culture, those things don't occur because we've got the armor and the masks going on.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to what the research has led to, like what understanding the research has led to around how people can intentionally discover, find, and contribute to these spaces, and what is an epicenter for change.
So yeah, what I'm proposing is that when you come into the Phoenix, come to one of their events, one of their kind of groups, whatever that may be, whatever that may look like. Actually, let's just say you're completely new to the space. Okay, so you're used to more of a colonial capitalist type space of interacting and being and all of that and relating. So you come into this space where people are going, hey, I'm having a really hard day today. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, that's a bit honest. People that I know, we don't really share that sort of stuff. But then when they're met back with love and warmth and support, that's now challenging my boxes. Okay, there's a different way of living and being here. Now, I'm not going to say I'm going to sign up to this on day one. It may freak me out and I may run 100 miles. I may never come back because that might be too challenging for me. Okay. But on the other hand, I might just come along and be a silent observer of this community and the way things are done for a while. And actually, X months down the line, I might open up a bit for the first time myself. And actually, when I am, I bet you, $1 million that someone in that community will respond in a loving and a warm way, not the typical way that would be done elsewhere. And that can begin that process of that person opening up and beginning a healing and restorative journey. So what I'm saying is I think that there's probably a really strong culture within the Phoenix of connection, creativity, authenticity, of vulnerability, of solidarity, people who've got your back and supporting one another, so on and so forth. And that culture is generative, okay? So it'll create those moments, those spaces where people can, where the breakthrough for healing and hope to occur, to arise, or actually that kind of exhalation of, I'm in a mess right now. Yeah. That liberation that, hey, I can let this stuff out, or I can ask for help. I'm really struggling. Can someone help me? So that epicenter for change, that when you come into the Phoenix, when you come into that atmosphere, that culture, that environment, it's like a slap in the face as a metaphor, not literally.
Everybody's keeping their hands to themselves, I promise you.
Yes.
You don't have to wear a helmet to Phoenix programs.
And you know, all of the research that's been done to date, that people who come into your community, they feel more hopeful, they feel more connected. Their well-being increases as a result of stepping onto your campus, coming to some of your events on a regular basis. So you've begun to measure the changes to people's levels of flourishing. So that's not an accident. It's not that you've got to go through a program. It's not that everyone has got to go through the 12 steps or counseling. And as wonderful as all those things are, so I'm not dissing those, and they've all got a value and they've all got a place. But this specific project is looking at kind of the impact and the benefits of this generative culture, and how this culture can allow us to find new ways of being and relating and doing and seeing and understanding the world. Because the models that we've been given of success and happiness lead to isolation currently lead to competition, leading to this aggressive behavior, this dog eat dog, putting myself first, having this limited resource mindset, this scarcity mindset. And so therefore that will impact my behaviors. When you
Mm,
come into the culture of recovery, actually, that's not the mindset. That's not the approach. Those are not the values, and those are not the norms. So we're going to set on about a project to kind of measure to what extent do people who engage with the Phoenix, how can that lead to this levels of flourishing, not just for those people in recovery, but actually, because I believe that this is kind of healing and transformative for everyone. You
mm,
know, like I opened with, I'm not somebody who's used illegal drugs. So, but engaging with the recovery community, experienced levels of healing and increased well-being and quality of life as a result of being around you guys,
mm.
because you challenge me to not be the fake self and to always say everything's fine and everything's always good all the time. For example, yeah, that's just
Yeah.
one example. In lots of different ways, I've learned so much from you guys, and my life is better for it.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. I was just talking to my girl last night about how when you change yourself, you change the world, and that's a big haughty
Uh,
notion. But the more that I give myself compassion and grace, the more that I can hold you with compassion and grace. And if
Completely.
I show you and I hold a space of compassion and grace for you, which is not necessarily me holding it for you, like it's just what I do for me, so it exudes for me, then you
Yes,
experience something and maybe you've never experienced that before. So
that's
maybe
right.
I show up for a way that you've expressed, maybe you're angry or mad, and you show up and you looking for a fight, and the fight starts with me, and that's one of the first times the fight has ever stopped for you.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
whoa, wait
yeah.
a minute, like this is the part where we put our dukes up and we get to swinging. Like, what do you mean? I'm good, and take care and have a good day, and I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm sorry you feel that way. That whoa, hold on, buddy.
Yeah.
And now I have to meditate on that, and now I have to look in the mirror, like, why did I even approach that person like that?
Mhm.
And then maybe that transforms and works on me in a way. It was like, okay, well, next time maybe I'll show up this way. And so this thing for me, this was this is a transformation that I call it a selfish selflessness,
Uh-huh.
because
Like it.
this is what was required for me to not drink alcohol and use drugs, was
Yes.
to show up in this way. So that was the catalyst for this behavioral change.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
if if I didn't make this behavioral change, then there was a chance that I would die. Is really what
Uh-huh.
it was.
Yeah.
But regardless of what the catalyst was, it still caused me to show up and hold space in a way that is compassionate, understanding, patient, and loving. And
Yeah.
so when you put that into the world, it has ripple effects.
I agree. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a wave.
Yes. And here's the thing, Bryce, I've just written this piece in it. So in the midst of your alcohol addiction, the ways and the models of the world and how to behave and how to react and respond had such a detrimental impact upon you. Okay. But in order for your survival, as you said, you probably would have died had you continued operating with a whole range of, obviously you just gave one example, much more kind of complex than that. But had you continued with those mindsets and those paradigms and those behaviors, then, it probably wouldn't have turned out so good. So I believe that people in recovery, a bit like kind of Martin Luther King, and that non-violent and non-participation in the ways of coloniality and capitalism, you had to create something different. You can't wait for the world to change before you go, okay, maybe I can get better and get well from the drinking, from the addiction.
Mm.
Okay, you can't wait for capitalism to collapse. You can't wait for coloniality and the empire to fall and racism and patriarchy and misogyny and all. You can't wait. So what you've had to do, what everybody's had to do in recovery, is they've had to create these alternative ways of living, these alternative maps and pathways to life living and flourishing. There's no manual. It came instinctively and organically, and you've learned from each other and, taken bits from each other and tools and practices that previous generations of people who've gone through this have used to thrive again, to more than just survive. But you
Mm.
knew that if you continued using the old patterns, the old map of life, well, that's why you got in the mess that you were in at a certain point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what we're mapping out with the Phoenix, this non-participation in certain practices and paradigms. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, I think people in recovery are some of the best utilizers of the resources at their fingertips that you'll find.
Yes.
And a lot of it on the front end is kind of like scratching the disc so that it skips. It doesn't
Yeah.
play anymore. So now I can put in a new disc and create a new pattern of living, a new pattern of showing up for the people around me, a new pattern of showing up for myself, holding myself with grace and allowing myself to make mistakes and allowing other people to cut me off on the freeway. And
Uh-huh.
maybe I tell myself a different story about where they're headed to versus
Uh-huh.
before, where it really meant something about me. I think this is
Yes.
the transformation that once we have internally, once again, it becomes that thing that kind of just bleeds into the world. It can't help but to bleed into the world. And so I'm excited to have people on the forefront of the work of the research and lifting up the stories in the community so that we can make tangible, quantifiable change. Glad to have you on that forefront. And we're definitely appreciative of having you on the show today.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me, Bryce.
Yeah. Where can people find you? You were talking about this book, these couple of books that are in the works. Where will people be able to get their hands on the research, the data? Where can they find you, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you. Yeah. So the two books that we're working on, the women's recovery pathways, and then also we're doing a prisons book. So to what extent does prison help or hinder recovery? They'll both be launched in March of 2025. So the publishing house called New Central Media. There's a link to that on my kind of website, drdavidpatton.co.uk. So yeah, you can find more information about the launch of those on that website.
Amazing. Well, once again, Dr. David Patton, I'm glad you showed up today, and it's been a wonderful conversation, and I know the community pulled something out of this one.
Oh, it's been great. Thanks so much.
All right. And we will catch you all on the next episode of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast.